Today, the leader of Hezbollah accused Israel of carrying out a massacre when thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies exploded in Lebanon earlier this week. Most of the devices were reportedly used by members of Hezbollah. Now, while Israel has said nothing about the explosions, it has confirmed a change in military focus from Gaza in the south to its northern border with Lebanon. Troops have already been moved into northern Israel, and today Hezbollah and Israel traded rocket fire across the border. We have more now on an entire region on the brink.
Fresh Israeli strikes hit southern Lebanon, while Israeli jets flew low over Beirut, breaking the sound barrier. The acts timed to take place exactly as Hezbollah's leader made this address.
Over 2 days, in 1 minute on Tuesday and in 1 minute on Wednesday, the Israeli enemy was aiming to kill no less than 5,000 people in 2 minutes without caring about any limits. And they have no problem with where they are killed and how they were killed.
Dozens of people have been killed and thousands injured after hundreds of pagers and walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah exploded. Hezbollah blames Israel and admits the bombings have delivered a severe blow. While the attacks appear to have targeted the group's members, many civilians have been caught up in the violence. Hospitals have been overwhelmed. Residents are now fearful of their electronic devices.
Can we expect any good from Israel? Children are being killed. Their parents had small devices and they were detonated. Of course we're scared, my children, my siblings' children, all of us. Who can feel safe? We have 5,000 injured in just 2 days. This isn't a small matter. It's war. Who can secure their phone now? When I heard about what happened, I left my phone on the motorcycle and walked away.
My sisters and I have iPhones, and when concerns arose about iPhones and lithium batteries, my siblings started avoiding touching their phones, fearing they might explode. It's a normal reaction. We are a country that has been hacked.
While Israel has not acknowledged the attack, its defense minister says the country is in a new phase of war.
Our goal is to safely return the residents of the north back to their homes. As time goes by, Hezbollah will pay an increasing price.
Hezbollah says it will continue its attacks on northern Israel as long as the war in Gaza continues, and is vowing retaliation for the bombings of recent days.
Well, I'm joined here at the big table in the studio tonight by our Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes. Shani, it's good to have you with us. Let's talk about the signaling we've been seeing, a lot of signaling this week between Israel and Hezbollah. How do you read the messages that were delivered today by the leader of Hezbollah?
Well, a toned-down speech, far less, we've seen him before in other speeches, far more railed up. And he was showing a lot of compassion to the injured, as he would mandatory need to do. And of course, at the same time saying Israel crossed all red lines and we will find a time and the opportunity to get our way with Israel. Mm-hmm. And this is also the key here, the time and the opportunity. Basically, Hezbollah sees this as a very long, conflict, that they're not in any rush in any way. They believe that the longer this war of attrition with Israel lasts, the weaker Israel gets, and they feel like very defiant. Mm-hmm. And this is part of the strength in this war with Israel. And he was, going back to that as well in this speech. At the same time, Israel seems to be trying with its actions in the last week to show to Nasrallah, we don't necessarily accept the kind of unofficial rules of conduct that we've had so far, and we're going to be bolder and try to poke, closer to you and badger you and the whole of Lebanon if needed, because we're not accepting the rules of the game that you are trying to set.
We also heard from the Defense Minister of Israel today. What messaging were you reading there?
Well, it's a consistent message we've been seeing coming from Israel in the last week. They're very clearly signaling the northern border is becoming the bigger issue Israelis need to deal with, partially because there's a greater pressure from the Israeli citizens who have been forced to evict their houses in the north of Israel to go back, or to at least have some sort of a plan that will show when they might be able to come back. That's one thing. But then also, on the other hand, we're also hearing from the Israeli military there's very little concrete action still to be done in Gaza. You know, there will be for many years ahead the needed to maintain this low intensity conflict with Hamas, but at the same time there's no breakthrough operation that they can think of to change fundamentally what we're seeing in Gaza. But what Nasrallah is trying to do in his speech is actually bring back this coupling of scenes, saying we're not going to stop as long as there's no solution to Gaza. So Israel, if you thought you can, leave Gaza inside and now deal with Lebanon and think this would be fine, it's not going to happen. These two are connected.
So they're connected. So are we seeing then a widening war, or a shifting of gravity, as we heard yesterday from Israel, for the military? I mean, what is this? Well,
again, we talk about signaling, and for Israel, it's important to try and show that it can keep all those balls up in the air at the same time. So we're talking about at least 3 active ones. That would be Gaza in the south, Lebanon and Hezbollah in the north, and, of course, the West Bank, we've been seeing in the last week becoming more and more toxic and violent. So Israel wants to show we're strong, we can do it. We also have unconventional means and a lot of technology and creativity to deal with all of that. Don't test us. And they hope that this signaling would be enough to deter any further, actions from either what they call the axis of evil coming through Iran, orchestrated through Iran and Hezbollah, or all through Hamas. It's yet to be seen. This is a very not so gentle, but very clear game of pushing back and forward, trying to reestablish, the rules of this very volatile scene.
And where does all of this leave hopes for bringing the rest of the hostages in Gaza home safely? And also, what about, the diplomatic efforts, particularly on the part of the United States, for a ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, that's always the question we've been baffled with for the last couple of weeks. Because if we're going back to this speech today, Nasrallah is clearly saying the only way out is a solution for Gaza, and the only way out from Gaza and a solution for Gaza has to include also bringing back of the hostages. However, when it comes to seeing either one of the sides, Israel or Hamas, making any concessions into a breakthrough, there's been very little optimism from most sides that this could actually happen. So for now, it seems like we are all stuck in this completely tragic.
Yeah, it's like the glass is half empty still. Shani, as always, good to get your analysis. Thank you.
Brent.
Well, I'm joined now by Nawaf Al-Thani. He's the former Qatari Defense Intelligence Director, and he's now a lecturer in international relations, and he joins me tonight from Doha. Mr. Al-Thani, it's good to have you with us. I'd like to maybe start by just asking you, what's the view where you are in Qatar about these presumed Israeli attacks against Hezbollah?
Well, Brent, thank you for having me. It's extremely unfortunate. The nature of the attack, as you know, being indiscriminate also is very worrying. I think the bigger picture, however, unfortunately, is it seems that we're taking one step forward and more than 2 steps backward at this stage when it comes to the widening and escalation of violence in the region. And unfortunately, this is just another chapter in the sad novel of the Middle East not finding its way to peace, but unfortunately, more and more to war.
What does this escalation on the Israeli-Lebanese border mean for the attempts to negotiate a ceasefire deal in Gaza?
Well, unfortunately, it just, the easy answer is it doesn't help. The very complicated answer would be it hurts very deeply because it broadens the scope of now finding peace. The question of peace was almost now coming up to a year, was the question of resolving the issue with Gaza, returning the hostages, ending the violence, and finding a way forward. But now the issue is how do we prevent broadening war in the Middle East? The issue with the Philadelphia corridor, for instance, brings Egypt, rightfully so, in concern about the forces there because it goes, very, very much against the peace accord that happened back in the 70s that led to peace between Egypt and Israel. And now with Hezbollah, it seems like we're walking rapidly backward in history and running towards conflict.
I'd like for you to take a listen to what the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said after the attacks in Lebanon about the process of negotiating a ceasefire in Gaza. Take a listen.
One of the hallmarks has been that it's a complicated process, and even the communications involved are complicated for obvious reasons, so things take time. And again, we've seen that in the intervening time, you might have an event, an incident, something that makes the process more difficult, that threatens to slow it, stop it, derail it.
You can hear the frustration in Antony Blinken's voice there. Do you think that frustration is shared in Qatar, which is playing a key mediating role?
I think it's very clearly shared in Qatar. We've heard from the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs just yesterday, echoing the same sentiment, while being still hopeful in Qatar that we're going to continue until there is a resolution. But there's no denying that with every obstacle comes a challenge of dealing with that obstacle before dealing with the issue at hand, and widening the scope of negotiations just loses focus from the issue that we need to be resolving. So I think many in this part of the world share the frustration of the Secretary.
Yeah, you mentioned these obstacles that keep popping up. Do you believe that the Israeli government is being sincere in its negotiations?
Well, if we look at sincerity, there are elements to that sincerity. I stay away from broad statements saying if they're sincere or not. But if we look at those elements, then it's very hard to see sincerity in those elements. Because on one hand, I'm sure they want to return their hostages and sue for peace. At least some elements in the governments do. But clearly, a lot of their actions that speak louder than their words do show that sincerity, if it exists, that it is highly challenged by actions that are contradicting that and that are going against not only the interest of the region, but the interest of the Israeli population themselves. Because many in Israel today, I don't think they look forward to another forever war that will not only bring most of Israel into it, but the region and the world, unfortunately.
The Lebanese ambassador to London today said that the Middle East is being held hostage by the fate of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's quite a statement. Is that a view which has any currency in Qatar?
Well, I think here in Qatar, we look at the broad picture, and I can't speak obviously for the government, I'm not in the government, but from my observations, we look to a broad picture of finding solutions, not problems. Now, the onus is always on those negotiating parties. It's not on the mediators, like the United States and Qatar, we can facilitate and help, but the onus is on the Israelis and on Hamas to find a resolution. Moving this conflict beyond the scope of the negotiations does make it extremely difficult and almost impossible at some point. And unfortunately, we're going close to that point of being impossible to resolve. And the focus should be on resolving it. So I think that is Qatar's view that it shares with America, that it's not about looking at problems, but looking at solutions, and focusing on those solutions has given Qatar that long history of success, almost 20 years of success. And I think that is important. Now, obviously, the Lebanese ambassador being closer to the issue and the incidents happening in Lebanon can speak much better than I on what's going on in Lebanon. But on a broader scale of the Middle East, I think focusing on solutions and not problems must be paramount. But that doesn't seem to be where we're going right now.
You're well aware, as we all are, that the United States seems to be struggling to rein in Israel. I'm wondering who in the region can have a moderating or mediating influence on Iran and its proxies?
Well, to be honest, right now, if we look at the facts on the ground, the Iranians, if we look at what was being proposed even in the media, that an Iranian response weeks ago was imminent, and it hasn't happened. I think we should deduce from that the Iranians, to a certain extent, its proxies, are not trying to provoke Israel further than this conflict. Now, again, we can only base that on the facts on the ground. We haven't seen a widening, or escalatory approach from Iran regarding this conflict, and we've seen quite many evidences. Now, that may change in the future, absolutely, but again, looking just to the facts on the ground, that hasn't happened. Now, on the Israeli side, unfortunately, that has happened. We've seen the issue right now with southern Lebanon, the attack yesterday and day before, the words of preparations of a broader war in the south of Lebanon. Those are factual, measurable things on all sides. So I think right now, bringing the parties to the negotiating tables and not widening the conflict, not widening the parties, because there's a limitation even to the negotiators, the mediators, dealing with two negotiating parties it's much easier just by math than dealing with, 3, 4 or more.
Here we are, it's late September, we're talking about the Middle East being on the brink of a wider war. Let's go back, if we could, to the beginning of this year. You posted a tweet on X or on Twitter, and I'd like to pull it up for our viewers. I'm just going to read that. You wrote, 2024 will be the closest the world has ever been to a global military and security conflict since the end of World War II. The real possibility of a widening conflict in the Middle East, the global security fallout because of it, and a probable shifting in the center of gravity of long-standing alliances all threaten the fragile global stability already tested by the war in Ukraine. And in a year where the world will witness the most elections in recent human history and a shaky economy, all of that makes 2024 a powder keg that could, in a perfect storm fueled by inaction and negligence, be devastating. Where do you stand now as we approach the last quarter of this year?
Unfortunately, I look back at that prediction and that I've based on my research and on the facts. Unfortunately, we're nowhere closer to resolving any of those issues, and unfortunately, we're still on track on a widening conflict. So, as saddened that I am, and I'm not prescient by any mean, unfortunately, we are moving forward in that direction. And just looking at the facts as they are playing out globally and regionally with global effects, obviously, we are going towards a situation that will now go beyond, I believe, 2024, almost indefinitely, I think, at this point. It will go beyond 2024. When it ends in 25, 26, we do not know. But it is widening, and we don't see opposing solutions to that situation right now. That's why what Qatar is doing and the United States is doing is vital, more important today than any time in the past, that they be supported in moving forward. But unfortunately, as you've said, it is getting worse.
Before we let you go, before we run out of time, where do you see hope? Where do you see reasons for hope?
I see reason for hope in reasonable people. And I think when it comes to Israel, for instance, because they're in the news, and we could choose many, but let's choose the Israeli government for now. I think it comes in the population of Israel. The people of Israel, that don't want to see war, should take more action. I think the people of the world should support them in that. Should that go beyond the prime minister and the government? That is a choice that each should make. But I think the population of the State of Israel and the region should look at the future of their children and their grandchildren, because this will impact generations to come. That is where I see hope. That hope is dwindling, unfortunately, but the hope is still there. Nawaf
Al-Thani, the former Qatari Defense Intelligence Director. We appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, joining me here in the studio now is Raphael Bossong. He's a security and terrorism expert with the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. It's good to have you back here in the studio with us. Let me just start by asking you, what did you think when you heard about these attacks this week? Were you surprised that pagers and walkie-talkies were used?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was a huge surprise to everybody, just the sheer scale of it. And I mean, there is a double irony here because apparently Hezbollah switched to those more old-fashioned communication devices because everybody was afraid of Israel's cyber capabilities to track and hack smartphones. And now that, you know, a double kind of attack. And as we learned more about it, it was actually rather old-fashioned in a way. So first everybody was thinking, oh, this is yet another super advanced Israeli cyber capability we haven't learned about. But no, it was old-fashioned explosives and just intercepted shipping. So
right, you're just infiltrating the supply chain and exactly. Are we, do you think, watching a widening conflict in the Middle East here?
I mean, that's obviously a huge concern already for several months, if not right after the 7th of October attack. I mean, who knows? I mean, diplomatic efforts have been ongoing very long and they have intensified, and nobody wants a regional war. Who knows what is the final tipping point? I think that we can have slight confidence, but this is very slight confidence, that because it hasn't happened yet, and also because Iran has stepped back from the brink so far and is facing other challenges, that ultimately calculation is still really for no one, again, including for Hezbollah and for Iran. But, you know, if there is another provocation, bets are off.
Well, you know, we were expecting to see a massive retaliation from Iran after the, you know, leader of Hamas was assassinated on Iranian territory several weeks ago. But that didn't happen.
I mean, indeed. I mean, there was obviously a huge show of force, and the US really put all its weight into the equation to kind of to demonstrate, you know, don't do it. And I mean, Israel, of course, by itself is a formidable force, as we also learned today. And so what has been shown and seen so far is there is no major new statement by the regional powers that would change that equation. But of course, we can't be sure. And I mean, that's a major worry.
The leader of Hezbollah today said what we saw in the past 2 days was a massacre. It amounts to a declaration of war by Israel. What about it constituting a war crime?
Well, this has been a debate really the last 2 days. I mean, technically speaking, the argument is that because of the convention on certain conventional weapons, which is a part of international law, okay, international law being more, okay, it's not directly enforceable, but it is signed by both Lebanon and Israel that booby traps and explosive devices that can be indiscriminate would be not acceptable. And so the question is, does this attack sort of is the same? Is it really an indiscriminate attack, like a booby trap? Or is it something that really targets the militants? Is it a proportionate attack on militants of Hezbollah? So depending on where you fall on this, yes, you could say it's a war crime, or at least against this convention, or it is a very targeted strike against Hezbollah.
It looks like, I guess, from the outside, it looks like this may have been a psych ops attack, because what the result of this is people who may have been trying to hide their affiliation with Hezbollah, maybe they've been outed because they had a pager in their pocket. But also now everyone in the country, reporters are saying they're worried about any device having a battery or something inside that could be detonated. So they're paranoid, they're scared, their security is gone.
I mean, obviously, I would be too. I mean, if I was in the situation, it's not quite clear whether this was the direct intention. I mean, unconfirmed, and I really have no further ways to corroborate it, but unconfirmed stories was that this was a capability that Israel held in reserve for a major war with Hezbollah, and that this was close to being discovered, and so use it or lose it, so that they kind of just basically used it before it was lost. But whether that's true or not, I can't tell.
Yeah, who knows? But it definitely got the attention of more than just Hezbollah, that's for sure. Raphael, it's always good to see you. We appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Welcome.